Hello, welcome back. It's Fred in the Shed up in the shack, and on this video we're going to be having a closer look at this used shortwave receiver radio that I've just purchased second hand. It's a Seishu SW5000. What we'll do on this video in a moment, we'll look at this radio in more detail, at its features. There's a few things I like about it. There's a couple of things I think they could have done better. Before we get started, get right stuck into it. If you're just popping onto the channel, if you're not a regular viewer, and really you just want to hear how this radio sounds, that's absolutely fine. I will leave a little pop-up at the top of the screen here. Just jump forward to this part of the video and you can hear the on-air testing and see what this radio sounds like. Hey, cheers, thanks for sticking with it, the regular guys. Shortwave radio, let's be honest, it's had its day, hasn't it? The internet and internet radio has pretty much killed it off now. All of the popular shortwave radio stations went over onto internet radio, and it's far easier to tune in. You don't have any of the propagation, the whistling, the howling, the in and out and all the rest of it. So it's a nostalgia trip now. Shortwave, the hobby of shortwave radio, it's pure nostalgia. Good news is that decent quality shortwave radios can still be picked up, I think, ridiculously cheap. This one came from a local charity shop. I was at work, wasn't expecting to buy a radio, just walking up to Costa on my break to get a drink. Looked in the charity shop window, there was this radio, £20. I mean, you know, £20. I think that's probably about the going rate for these. If you look on eBay, you're not going to pay much more, but obviously you've got postage and things. But £20 for a shortwave radio. This radio was sold in the UK, mostly sold by Dixons and then Currys, because I think Dixons bought out Currys in the late 80s. Sold as the Seishu SW5000. Sold in this country about 1988 to about 1995, typically around about £80 in Dixon. So it wasn't expensive, but wasn't exactly cheap either. Also sold under many other names as well. Tandy sold it as a realistic DX440, around about the same price. Also sold by Sangen, I think I've pronounced that right, Sangen as the ATS 8038, and I think they manufactured it because, having done a little bit of research on the internet, I believe stenciled onto the motherboard of the PCB is a Sangen logo. Now, it cost a lot more. It cost double if you bought the 803, typically £150, even up to £245, which is a little bit weird. It was half that price in Tandy. Also sold as a Matsui MR4099 and a Siemens RK651. So it came in many guises, this radio, very much a generic radio of the time. One feature that you would take completely for granted in 2022, but it was quite a feature in a day, was the digital display and the direct entry keyboard. A lot of shortwave radios at the time still had all of the analog bands where you had to tune the old VFO many times to find the frequency you want. This one, you simply looked up the frequency in your radio times, something like that, punched it in, execute, I rather like that, execute, and straight onto the frequency. On the old shortwave AM, it'll go 150 up to 29,999 kilohertz. So 150 kilohertz all the way up to just under 30 megs. Looking at the front of the radio and the controls, yeah, it does look a little bit dated now in the 2020s. It was a thing of its time, late 80s, early 90s, and it does have slider controls for the volume, balance, bass and treble. And that's good. It's much better to have bass and treble when you're trying to tune in DX than just have a simple tone control. But slider controls, I never really liked slider controls on radios. They were very popular on sort of mid-80s hi-fi. At least these ain't at a stupid angle, they are square. But yeah, it does have slider controls. Below that, though, we have a BFO pitch, so this will do lower sideband and also upper sideband. And what I think is quite important, it has a proper RF gain control, so you can adjust the sensitivity of the antenna. Now, if you're going to connect this to a long wire, and it does have an external antenna socket on the back. We'll have a look at the moment. It's an RCA phono, which is a little bit odd, but yeah, it can be quite easy to sometimes overload radios with an external antenna, so it's really nice to see an RF gain control to turn down that static, that interference. Have 3 little switches below the BFO pitch here. On the AM you have a wide and narrow switch. That's pretty good, and that doubles up as a mono and stereo FM switch, because although this has quite a nice large 4-inch built-in speaker, mono, it is stereo through the headphones. Then you've got the BFO off and on to switch from AM to sideband, upper and lower, and then finally a lock switch which locks the frequency. On this side of the radio you've got the direct numerical keyboard with the execute button. I do rather like that, it's very computer aged. And then we've got a mode switch which simply just turns the radio onto the clock. Now it does have a clock, yep, it certainly has. It's got a 24-hour clock, has an alarm function, also an on-off sleep and timer function. Has a store button. This radio has a memory. You can store up to 9 presets, which isn't a lot compared to a scanner, but yeah, 9's better than nothing. Has a scan feature. Hopefully we can see the display. I think we can. By pressing that, it will then scan. It's a bit odd, the scan. I've been playing with the scan feature. It only scans going upwards, and I won't really get much shortwave in here because of the LED lighting, but I've noticed that although the signal meter does move up and down when it receives a shortwave radio station, it only stops on some of the stronger stations, so you can see the weaker ones go by. Yeah, it's a little bit odd, and also it has got a signal meter. We'll be looking at that in a moment when we do the testing. 1 to 5, it's a bit okay. It's either like off or semi-on the signal meter. It's not the most sensitive, but yeah, the scan function's good if you just want to go through the commercial bands there on shortwave and bring those in. Below this we have a simple up and down switch for the manual tuning. There's no fine tuning, which is a bit of a shame. I think a fine tuning little pot would have been good, especially for sideband. It only tunes down to 1 kHz. That's a bit of a shame. That's something that might have helped. Now this is a bit odd. The tuning is dead simple. If you want to just tune up and down manually, just by pressing it once or up and down, it just tunes in 1 kHz steps. But if you hold it down for a manual scan, it then starts tuning in 10 kHz steps, which is just that little bit odd. You have got a manual VFO on the side there. It does chuff a little bit as well. I've noticed when you sort of tune it, it's okay, but it's slightly indented on the manual VFO. But it doesn't matter how you set the volume on the speaker, it does tend to chuff a little bit between the stations. Probably might annoy me if I was going to use this radio a lot of the time. As a casual user, it's no problem at all. And then finally, below the keypad there, incidentally, if you're on the clock function and you just, for any reason, if you want to just see the seconds, hold that down, you get minutes and seconds, bit of a built-in timer if you like. Don't really know really what good that is, but it does it. And then you've got your simple bands there, AM, FM, long wave, medium wave and shortwave. Whilst you're on shortwave, put it into shortwave there. If you just keep pressing the shortwave button, it will take you through on the preset bands. They're all in there, the ones that you would use on the broadcast band, you know, 49 meters, 41, 31, 25, 19, 16, etc. So it's a quick way of accessing the bands for the broadcast frequencies. Looking at the radio overall, it's pretty nicely made actually for something that was made. Everything got very plasticky in the late 80s, early 90s, but this has certainly lasted its time well. It's in very nice condition. It was just a little bit scruffy with a dirt and things. I don't think it had been used for so many years. Everything, all the controls, the pots, I didn't have to put any lubrication spray. They're all very, very nice and linear. I think the BFO pitch and the RF gain, these are very, very small, and I've got small hands, and yeah, I think that would have been nicer if they'd have made those a little bit bigger. Maybe as a small small complaint. So just looking around the radio, like I mentioned, it's got a full 4-inch speaker. It does go very loud. Sounds quite nice on FM. So you've got the separate bass and treble control. That's a nice thing to have. It hasn't got a lot of bass, surprisingly. You'd expect it to have a little bit more, but certainly it's nice to play about with the bass and treble when you're on shortwave to reduce some of the interference. This side of the radio, well, nothing much going on. As I say, it's got this VFO meter. It's slightly clicky, and it does do that rather annoying chuffing noise, if you like, but is what it is. Looking at the top of the radio, we've got a few functions here. Has a light. This is a sort of press and a hold thing to save the batteries, but it does work. An incandescent bulb there, not LED or anything like that. And then you've got the timer and also the sleep function. 40-inch, very long, telescopic whip antenna, and this one isn't bent, and even the end is present, because they sometimes get pulled off. It's quite interesting because, as you can see, and we'll look at the back in a moment, there is a metal stand here if you want to lay it flat on a bench, but the whip itself has a rather nice feature. If you pull up, there we go, you're able to pull this up, so when you lay the radio flat, you can still have the whip in the upright vertical position. So that's been well thought out. Someone gave that a nice bit of thought. This radio is a little strange because it takes 6 D-cell batteries, so they're quite big and heavy, but below those you have 2 AA's. Now they just power the clock and the memory presets. I was concerned someone might have just left those in and they've corroded, because that can kill a radio so easy. But when I open the back, and the 2 batteries that you're seeing now, I've put those in myself. When I open the back, really, really nice and clean. All the terminals, they look brand new. So I don't think that this radio has actually been used with batteries, which is a little odd, because most real shortwave radio enthusiasts will use a radio on batteries, because you sometimes get a little bit of RF interference from the switch mode wall power supply. Incidentally, this one did come with a power supply. I'll show you the picture of it. Quite nice to get that, actually. It's got an adjustable voltage and also an adjustable polarity, which is quite important, because you'll find with these radios they've not got the same polarity. Some are centre pin positive, some are centre pin negative, and it's easy to connect it wrong and end up blowing a diode inside the radio, and that's not something you want to do when you've just bought it. Very important on a shortwave radio, an external antenna socket. It's a bit strange because it's an RCA phono. These are normally, say, 1.8 or 3.5mm jack. I don't know why it's got a phono on it, but it's there. And then finally, you've got an external and internal antenna switch. On the right-hand side of the radio, we've just got 3 jacks. Quite good. It's got a direct feed out, which has a tape recorder symbol there, so I suppose you'd reconnect this up to a tape recorder to record off the radio. Has 5 little pins on that jack. It's a very old looking jack, and I seem to remember seeing these on hi-fi of the late 70s, I think probably maybe early 80s. I tell you what, if you can remember what that jack was called, I'd be interested to know, so perhaps leave that in the comments for me. And then below that we have a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. It is stereo, this radio, even though it's got a mono speaker. It is stereo, and there is a balance control on the front. That's pretty odd. And then below that you've got a power in jack there. It's 9 volts, but it's centre pin negative. A lot of power supplies are centre pin positive, so you've got to be a little bit careful. So as I say, you would blow the diode if you got that wrong. And then because it has a headphone socket, I will connect it directly into the camera. And let's see how this thing sounds. A 40-year-old radio. Let's see if it's still got some of that magic, and we'll see what it picks up. But yeah, cheers. Thanks for watching the intro. Let's get on with the testing.
ممكن بركيزة الاثنين يوليخ يا بشلاخ فده انا بقول كنت مثلا ما اذا انا غالبا نريد ان نرجع فشاري نتيجه ثانيه من شنو لنا در سواکان یک مرد آمده نزدیک نماز تلفن همین خرید 10
leading West Ham by a goal to nil after just 9 minutes, thanks to a Kurt Zouma own goal.
To World Today. I'm Wilson in Beijing. Today we're talking about the latest COVID outbreak in China. Today we have Professor Jaya Dantas, Dean International in the Faculty of...
In my opinion, we should get away with the zero tolerance. But on the other hand, there are even more than people who think that the zero tolerance policy is still
oo sharciga haddaad garanaysaan in aad hadiyo wanaagsan carruurtiina siisaan intee ka badan ayaa aabihiina jannada ku nasıl bilecekler seni yaşamadan tersini.
Echo India Delta, 60 kilometers east from Düsseldorf, outside in the countryside, Bruno. Too long, 20 meters over lake, Bruno. Microphone back to you. FT101 DXMP. Tempo WX is cloudy and some rain. And 6 degrees Celsius, 6 degrees only. Yesterday we had sunshine, Bruno, but today it's cold and some rain, Bruno.
Norway 2 Hotel calling
CQ 40.
CQ 14 radio.
Norway 2 Hotel calling CQ 40.
Very thin wire, that means that you have to length the wire. So the length of diameter of the wire will give you the exact frequency. And sometimes if you have very thin wire, like we say from 1 millimeter or so, then you have some not more than 12. So how thick the wire is, how shorter you can put it over.
Lo más importante, que nos riamos
y que sobre todo seamos felices en la radio. Hasta luego, Juanjo.
Hasta luego. Ese cuerpo tiene
Tierra aquí lo que vuelve.
perfecto ahí. Bueno, tienes ahí para entretenerse ahí de cosas, ¿no? Así que bueno.
Message, on entend toujours les petits écrétages, mais c'est nettement moins compliqué. Voilà, je vais retourner tout de suite le micro, si vous le permettez, à F4 Hôtel Kilo Novembre qui s'est manifesté. Donc 73 sur M, ici Florida 8 Alpha Papa Hotel, l'opérateur Alex, 30 km au sud de Paris. Donc en compagnie de F4 Lima Victor Foxtrot, l'ami Claude, et Florida 4 C Charlie.
Going into the D. 73, thanks for the kill. Mike 0, Whiskey Papa Juliet, from Papa Alpha 8, George Baker, over. Yeah, Roger Peter, take care, 73, and until the next time, from Papa Alpha 8, Golf Bravo is QRT. Bye-bye.
And yeah, there you go. That's about it. That was recorded around 5 o'clock out in my garden there. The sun just starting to set. I thought the radio had a really, really nice mellow sound. I used a patch lead from the headphone socket into the microphone and the camera, so it gives you an impression what the radio sounds like on headphones. And it's a very nice sound for a 35-year-old plus radio. Now, as I say, I paid £20 in a charity shop. I'm more than happy with that. I think I got a bit of a bargain there. I've seen these on eBay. They can go for quite a bit more, really. They can go for £35 up to £40. I'm not quite sure I'd pay that much for it. Maybe 30, 35 maximum. So don't get carried away, because this is a nostalgia thing, really. What I've done, I've sent off for a little adapter for the external antenna socket, and I will be connecting this radio up to my CB Antron 99, and in a few weeks' time, on the 27555, we'll have the skip coming in from Europe, so I'll be recording a little bit of upper sideband CB action. And look out for a video for that in the future. Make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that. But I think for now, I'd just like to say cheers. Thank you very much. It's a long video. It's over 20 minutes, so well done for sticking with it. There's the thumbs up from Fred. Give it back to me down below. I would really, really appreciate it. And as always, you guys stay safe. And yeah, I'll catch you all on the next one. Cheers, guys.